We're going to have a little bit of, I hope, maybe a little bit of fun this morning. But before I begin with the fun, have you ever gone to a restaurant, you place an order, you're waiting so diligently for that lovely meal that you're visualizing, you can smell the aromas that other people being served, and finally this extravagant meal that you've ordered, your mouth is watering for, it shows up, and you realize something went horribly wrong with your order because it's just the wrong foods, it's done improperly, and you had to, some people would send it back. I'm kind of passive. I would just eat it with a smile, because I don't like sending the food back. But I read a story about somebody who had an interesting way of dealing with these situations. He was a guest in a very posh hotel, had a very fine restaurant attached to it. And so he came in one morning for his breakfast, and he called the head waiter over, and he wanted to place his order. And here's how he did it. He said, "I'd like one egg, but I want it undercooked, so that it's runny, and I want one egg overcooked so that it's tough and hard to eat." Then he said, "I'd also like some grilled bacon, but I want it a bit on the cold side. I also would like a piece of burnt toast, and I want some of that butter right out of the freezer that's really hard to spread on the bread. And then I also, to top off my meal, I'd like some lukewarm, weak coffee." So the waiter, I guess he's figured he's got a live one here. He says, "Sir, that's a very complicated order. It might be quite difficult for me to fulfill that." And the guest in the restaurant kind of replies back a bit sarcastically, "It can't be that difficult. That's exactly what you brought me yesterday." Not very comforting, is it? I guess he couldn't beat him, so he joined him when he was getting not the kind of comforting foods that he wanted. Well, here's the fun part. I have a little quiz for you today as a part of our communion meditation, and it goes like this. Did you know that each state has its own particular comfort foods? True. Somebody figured that out. So what I did, now I will tell you, the first service got all of these right, so the pressure is on. So I'm going to offer you the comfort foods, and I want you to tell me which state it represents. Have you got it? So here you go. First comfort food: sweetened iced tea, fried chicken, chicken and dressing with giblet gravy, cornbread, potato salad, country fried steak, peach cobbler. See, the peach cobbler gave it away, didn't it? It's Georgia. Okay, how about this one? A little harder: green chili stew, red chili cheese enchiladas, split pea soup, dried beans and cornbread, special recipe macaroni and cheese, green chili chicken enchiladas, and lemon meringue pie. Come on, sin boldly, say it. Texas, that's it. You got it, very good. Okay, here's one: jumbo buttermilk biscuit, chicken and watermelon and waffles, stone crabs, fried chicken, bacon-wrapped plantains, lobster Pop-Tart, gator bites, key lime pie. It's the key lime pie, wasn't it? That's what gave it away. Okay, here's the hardest one. Are you ready? And the last one, thank goodness. Salmon jerky, halibut, moose, caribou, elk, beer, reindeer sausage. You got them. Very good. You got all. But there's one that's been left out. There is comfort food left out of this list that no state picked. Do you know what it is? It's the bread and the cup. And it's represented in this table right before us today. In John, the Gospel of John, chapter 6, verses 32 through 35, Jesus talks a bit about this meal and why it's so important and why it's the greatest comfort food. He says this, talking to a group: "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread of heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." When the individuals Jesus was speaking to, when they heard that, they realized this greatest of all comfort foods being offered. And so one said, "Sir, give us this bread, give us this meal always. Jesus replied, I am this bread. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry. There's the bread. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. There's the cup, the bread and the cup. So what are you hungry for today? Too often, I think, what we're hungry for, both literally and spiritually, what we hunger for is not very good for us. So how do we become better eaters? As people of faith, how do we become better eaters? Especially if this comfort food, which has been promised, you're only allowed to have half of it. Only the bread. How can our thirst be quenched if we're prohibited from the cup? It's an interesting dilemma. What would it feel like for you if you didn't have the opportunity to come in to church and come to the Lord's table and receive the fullness of this meal, both bread and the cup, given by Jesus to us to do always? What would it mean if that cup went missing? Would you notice? Would it make any difference in your life? Because that's exactly what people were experiencing 500 years ago. One of the things we learned on our Reformation trip, and some of us knew this already, but others were hearing it for the first time, is one of the reasons that the church needed to be reformed is up until the Reformation, only the priest received the cup. You all would have been excluded. It would have gone missing. It would have been the missing piece. You would have been able to have the bread, but you couldn't have tasted from the cup. And that's why the reformers worked so hard to say, wait, Jesus said, come to the table, come and taste, come and drink, be filled, have your thirst quenched. What would it be like if that piece was missing today? Last year, for those of you who are football fans, some are, some aren't, but I think you'll understand the illustration. Last year in the Super Bowl, you had the Patriots and you had the Falcons. So the first service, I went through the whole message saying Cardinals. So it's the Falcons. I had 15 people come up to me after the service. Joe, you know it was really the Falcons, don't you? So you have permission to correct me sometimes. Okay, but it's the Falcons. The Patriots and the Falcons, they played. And if you watched that game, for almost the entirety of the game, it was a blowout. The Falcons, absolutely, it was just no hope. They were so far ahead, New England Patriots, where you could just see they were just decimated. They were ready to give up. But only in the last few minutes of that game did they have one of those most amazing comebacks in Super Bowl history. The Patriots actually came back and they beat the Falcons, which meant at the end of the Super Bowl, they present that trophy. It meant that that Falcon team that was so far ahead that they could taste the victory of holding up that trophy, that winning cup, right? The winning cup. They had to sit by on the sidelines and watch the cup be received, the trophy that is, received by the other team. They were spectators. They weren't allowed to participate. You know, most players will tell you that just getting to the Super Bowl is a fantastic thing. There are lots of monetary rewards for even making it there. Sometimes there are lucrative deals afterwards in commercials if you did something outstanding on the field. But if you asked any of those players from the Falcons, they would tell you they were left with a missing piece. And I don't just mean the trophy, P-E-A-C-E, a missing piece, because they had come so far only to see someone else receive. I think that's what it must have been like for folks 500 years ago, to watch only the priest receive the cup, and everyone else is a spectator. They're missing something. It was the missing piece. When it comes to this table, to the bread and to the cup of Christ, we're not limited today in 2017 to only watch someone else receive the fullness of this sacrament, because Jesus doesn't want us to miss out on any of this meal. Not the bread, not the filling, not the quenching of thirst of the cup. And it's offered right here. And one of the things we learned during our trip was, thanks to reformers like John Calvin and John Knox, who is really John Knox, he's really the father of the Presbyterian Church, in a real way, because of Presbyterians, reformers, that said we must pay attention to what Jesus said, the bread and the cup to be received and to remember. They knew we needed the balance of that comfort food, spiritually speaking, that demonstrated new life. So here's why this cup, what was a missing piece for hundreds of years until the Reformation, here's why this missing cup, this missing piece is so important to us today. Jewish tradition doesn't say a whole lot about all the cups that were used at the Seder meal, that's that Passover meal, but it does say a little bit about the cups. We're told that they should be filled with red wine. Why red wine? It was to remind the people of the blood of the Passover lamb. Remember the story? You put the blood of the Passover lamb, you put it on your doorpost so the angel of death would pass over. That Passover lamb was the sacrificial lamb that protected and gave life. So they would have these meals, and at the meals there were cups. And each time the cup is filled, or maybe it might have been a different cup, it has a different name. Now, you may not have known this, but I think it's important if we're going to talk about a missing piece. Many biblical scholars identify the 4 cups of the Passover based on the promises offered in Exodus 6. And I just want to read you these promises. And as I do read you these promises in Exodus 6, I want you to listen for the cups. Listen for the 4 different cups and see if you can identify them. I'll be reading from Exodus 6, verses 6 through 7. Say therefore to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will free you from the burdens of the Egyptians and deliver you from slavery to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. You shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has freed you from the burden of the Egyptians. Promises. So there were 4 cups, and each one of the cups represented part of the promise. The first cup was called the Kaddish, which means a cup of sanctification. And it's based on one of those statements, the first one, where God said, I'll free you from the burden of the Egyptians. The second cup that they would fill was called the cup of judgment. Sometimes it's called the cup of plagues, based on God's statement, I will deliver you from slavery to them. Remember how they were delivered from slavery? It was through those plagues. That's why it was called the cup of judgment or cup of plagues. The third cup is the one we want to focus on, the missing piece today. The third cup was called the cup of redemption or the cup of blessing. And it was based on that statement you just heard me read where God says, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. The fourth cup is called the cup of Hallel, which means praise. Based on that statement, the last one, I will take you to be my people, and I'll be your God. 4 cups. There's one cup, however, Jesus talks about, and you know the story. You can hear the name of the one cup Jesus lifts. You hear it in the New Testament. At that Passover Seder, we call it the Last Supper, or we celebrate today as communion. It's the cup that's taken after the meal. The cup taken after the meal is the third cup. And what did we just learn about the third cup? It's called the cup of redemption. Cup of redemption, third cup. So it says Jesus took that cup after supper. And in the account, it says, Jesus relates, this cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. The cup of redemption. Now he says, it's poured out for you. The promise has been honored. It's a new covenant in my blood. And it's not just Jesus that identifies the third cup, that missing piece which we'll taste today. In 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about the cup also. Chapter 10, verse 16. Paul says, the cup of blessing that we bless, is it not a sharing of the blood of the Passover? It's not a sharing for you of the new covenant in my blood. Is it not a sharing for you? He's saying that cup of redemption is once again a sharing of the new covenant, a sharing of the blood of Christ. So we receive today what was missing for many centuries is now here. It's no longer missing for us. We have the cup of redemption. It's the cup of Christ, and it's on this table today. And it celebrates those promises that God does redeem us. Remember that I said at the very beginning that the Jews used the cup to symbolize the blood of the Passover lamb? That's how significant it is that Jesus says, this cup that you taste, and he offers us to do it continually over and over again, is a new covenant. It's poured out in his blood. He is the Passover lamb, shed, his blood shed for us. We never forget when we come to this table. We never forget. It's no longer missing that salvation, our salvation, was purchased by the Lord's sacrifice on the cross. Because God redeems with an outstretched arm. So this cup of redemption means peace, and it is no longer missing. So in a moment, I'm going to ask that you prepare yourself to come to this table, to come and taste not just the bread and not just the cup, but the fullness, the most comforting meal that God can offer. And it's at the invitation of Jesus Christ. We receive at this